Hello and welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here every day on the Bible Stories Now channel. Today, we'll talk about the 12 Spies. Have you ever been in the middle of a challenge and wondered, can I really trust God's promise for my life? Or maybe you've noticed fear creeping in, overshadowing your faith, even when you're surrounded by God's blessings. The story of the 12 spies and the courage of Joshua and Caleb invite us to look beyond the difficulties and find the strength to keep moving forward in God. Together, let's uncover how faith in God can turn uncertainty into victory. Stay until the end to strengthen your trust in God's promises. Watch our daily videos to renew your faith. And don't forget to subscribe now to receive new insights and experience a daily encounter with God. The proposal to send spies. The Bible shows us how God guides his people step by step, and Moses' decision to send spies to the Promised Land is a prime example. Imagine the anticipation of the Hebrews. They had left Egypt, a place of suffering, and were now standing before the Promised Land. That land, rich and flowing with milk and honey, was everything God had promised them, but along with the excitement came doubt and fear. So, under God's guidance, Moses decided to send leaders from each tribe to explore the land. This decision shows us a timeless lesson. Before making major decisions, we need to seek God's guidance. Don't you agree? Whether it's about family, work, or spiritual matters, inviting God into our plans is essential. Moses, rather than relying solely on his experience, entrusted this decision to God. Think about how, sometimes, we make decisions without even consulting God, relying instead on our own perspective. Could we do things differently? God invites us to make him the center of our choices, not just for big decisions, but for the small ones too. Moses knew that God had promised this land, yet he also understood that the people needed this time of reflection and confirmation. Maybe, like the people of God, you've also faced times of uncertainty. In these moments, Moses' example reminds us to depend on divine guidance. God's promise was there, but as we'll see, reaching it would take obedience and faith. Now, with the spies on their way, the people waited eagerly for a report that would reveal more about the Promised Land. What would they find? And how would they react? The journey of the spies. The 12 spies now stood in the Promised Land, exploring every detail of the place God had described as a land flowing with milk and honey. Imagine their amazement as they saw fertile fields, fruit-laden trees, and flowing rivers. Canaan was real, and God's promise was alive before their eyes. It was as if God were saying, "Here's the proof that what I promised is true." Yet, disbelief began to creep into the hearts of some. Among the wonders they encountered was a notable symbol, a cluster of grapes so large that it had to be carried by 2 men. This fruit was clear evidence of the land's fertility and God's promise. But what some saw as a symbol of hope, others viewed with fear. Interesting, right? Sometimes, even when we're surrounded by God's blessings, we still hesitate to trust him completely. Have you ever felt that way? This journey teaches us that it's not enough just to see God's promises. We need to interpret them through faith. Even with the proof before their eyes, many of the spies focused only on the challenges. For Joshua and Caleb, the vision was different. They saw God in control, while others saw only obstacles. Recognizing the blessings around us as signs of God's care can transform our confidence, even in times of uncertainty. So, with fruit in hand and hearts divided between hope and fear, the spies were ready to return to camp and share what they had seen. What would they report? And how would this vision influence the people? Conflicting reports. When the 12 spies returned to camp, the people gathered, eager to hear their report. They all had seen the same land, but their accounts were vastly different. 10 of the spies focused on the challenges, talking about fortified cities and the strong people inhabiting Canaan. They exaggerated the difficulties, allowing fear to cloud their words. To them, the challenges were bigger than God's promise. Have you ever felt this way? Sometimes, We let obstacles overshadow what God has promised us. But Joshua and Caleb had a different perspective. Yes, there were challenges, but they trusted that God would be with them and give them victory. While some saw giants and barriers, Joshua and Caleb saw opportunities for faith. They remind us of something important: the voices we choose to listen to shape our faith. Hearing negative reports can stifle our confidence in God, but listening to words of encouragement can strengthen us to keep going. Maybe you're facing criticism or discouraging voices around you. In these moments, the Bible teaches us to return to God's promise, staying focused on His words. Just as Joshua and Caleb held on to God's promise, we too can choose to hear His voice above the circumstances and challenges surrounding us. The spies' divided reports cast a shadow of doubt over the people. Now they faced a choice: to follow fear or to trust God. How would they respond? And how would Joshua and Caleb handle the disbelief around them? The intervention of Caleb and Joshua. In the midst of the fear spreading throughout the camp, Caleb and Joshua rose with a message of encouragement. Imagine the courage of these two men. They stood before a people overcome by fear and disbelief, yet they didn't hesitate to declare, "The land is good, and the Lord is with us." For them, God's presence was enough to overcome any challenge. This moment shows us what it means to have true faith, a faith that stands firm even in the face of opposition. Caleb and Joshua didn't deny the challenges. They reminded the people of something greater: God's promise. This makes us think about how, in difficult times, we need to stand firm in God. How often have we faced situations where everything around us seems discouraging? In those moments, spiritual courage is essential. Joshua and Caleb were voices of faith in an environment filled with doubt and disbelief. This is something we're all called to be in our lives, whether at work, in family, or among friends. And how can we cultivate this courage? One key is to stay connected to God and His promises, even when others around us don't understand. This requires seeking encouragement in Him and staying aligned with His Word, knowing that trusting in God helps us face any adversity. Despite Caleb and Joshua's words of hope, the people remained resistant. Many were overtaken by disbelief, their faith smothered by fear. Now, the people were about to make a decision that would impact their future. How would this rebellion affect the journey of God's people? The people's rebellion. In the face of the fear sparked by negative reports, the people responded with rebellion. Driven by fear and a lack of faith, many began to complain against Moses and Aaron, questioning why they'd left Egypt. Imagine the depth of this rebellion. Instead of trusting in God and His promise of a prosperous land, the people preferred to return to their past slavery. This choice shows how fear and doubt can distort our vision, making us question God's blessings. The Hebrews' rebellion wasn't just against their leaders. It was, above all, a rejection of God's promise and character. Have you ever wondered how this applies to us today? How often, when faced with difficulties, do we let fear cloud our view of what God has already done for us? When we forget past victories and blessings, it's easy to fall into the temptation of giving up. Here, we see the importance of constantly remembering God's faithfulness. To overcome weaknesses and moments of doubt, we must hold on to His promises already fulfilled in our lives. God invites us to recall His works because this strengthens our confidence in what He will still do. Remembering blessings keeps our faith alive, even when our circumstances seem unfavorable. The people's choice to complain against God would have deep consequences. Their unbelief separated them from God's promises, and now they were about to face divine judgment. What would this mean for their future? God's judgment. The people's rebellion came with serious consequences. The Bible tells us that when God saw their unbelief, He decreed that they would wander in the wilderness for 40 years, 1 year for each day the spies spent exploring the promised land. Only Joshua and Caleb, who had shown faith and obedience, would enter the land God had promised Israel. Imagine the pain and regret of those who realized too late the weight of their choice. Their lack of faith kept them from the promise. This event reflects both God's justice and mercy. The unbelieving generation would pay the price for their rebellion, but God did not abandon his people. He promised that their children would inherit the promised land, fulfilling the promise made to Abraham. This judgment reminds us that unbelief has consequences, but also that God's grace endures for those who persevere. Today, we may not face 40 years in the wilderness, but we can still fall into the trap of letting fear close doors that faith could open. Trusting God is the way to see his promises fulfilled in our lives, and this event challenges us to examine our choices. Are we acting in faith or fear? Are we ready to wait on God's timing and obey his will? Even in the wilderness, God was preparing his people for the promise. And just as in the past, God's faithfulness never fails. Now we turn our eyes to God's faithfulness to those who believe. What would Joshua and Caleb's reward be for their trust and obedience? God's faithfulness to those who believe. Throughout this journey, Joshua and Caleb stood out as men of faith in God. They saw the same challenges as the other spies, but chose to trust in God's promise. And how does God respond to their faith? He rewards them, allowing them to be the only ones of their generation to enter the promised land. This reward reveals a powerful truth. God's faithfulness fully shows up in the lives of those who choose to trust and obey him, even amidst obstacles. Joshua and Caleb's story reminds us that victory doesn't depend on our strength but on trusting in God's faithfulness. In our walk of faith, we face many challenges, and it's easy to let fear or negativity influence us. But God calls us to trust him above all, to believe his promises will be fulfilled in due time. When we do this, he turns our uncertainty into courage, leading us to places we couldn't reach without faith. Like Joshua and Caleb, we're called to keep our eyes fixed on God, remembering that he never fails in his promises. God's faithfulness not only strengthens our faith but also serves as a testimony to others. When we see the results of trusting him, we can inspire those around us to do the same, seeking an unshakable faith that withstands life's storms. Wherever you are right now, I invite you to lift your thoughts to God and receive the blessing of a powerful prayer. I'll start now. Dear God, we thank you for your faithfulness and for teaching us, through the story of Joshua and Caleb, the power of trusting your promises. Thank you for every sign of your presence in our lives and your guidance in uncertain times. We ask you to strengthen our faith, especially in the challenges we face, so we never stop hearing your voice. Help us remember past victories and move forward with courage. In Jesus Christ's name, Amen. If you faced challenges where you had to trust God against all odds, share your experience. Testimonies like these inspire others to draw closer to God's word and seek a living faith. As we close, let's ask God to renew our trust so that we may walk firmly, like Joshua and Caleb, on our own faith journey. If you've made it this far, type in the comments, "I received the final blessing." If you're not yet subscribed, subscribe, like, and share. May God bless you and your family. See you in the next video.